the entire research lab, copyright of the documents, and 50% of personal assets will be transferred to Hannah Williams. The entire room seemed to freeze for a few seconds, and no one said a word. The lawyer's words hung in the air, and I stood still, eyes wide open, unable to believe what I had just heard. How could this be? Hannah, he's already in the nursing home. Don't worry about it anymore. That was the cold statement I received from my parents during a phone call. Those words took my breath away, like something had suddenly tightened around my heart. I remember my mother's voice, stressing each word as if it were the only truth, and I had to accept it. But how could this be? Why a nursing home? Why couldn't it be somewhere else, somewhere he could live happily, a place where I could visit him, hear the science stories he always told, about the crazy ideas he had nurtured since I was a child? But no, they cut me off completely. The lies about the truth I always wanted to believe in. Throughout my life, he was the only one who truly understood me. Every time I helped him with experiments in the garage, his eyes would light up like a bright lamp, and he would call me Little Scientist, a name I always cherished. He taught me that intellect and curiosity are the most precious things in life, more than anything money or career could offer. I always kept those memories in my heart, but when he needed me most, I wasn't there. The letters I sent no longer got replies. The calls I made went unanswered. Every time I asked my parents about him, they answered casually, saying he was in a nursing home, that he didn't want to meet anyone anymore. I didn't know what to do with the lingering doubt in my heart. He, the one I loved and respected so much, where was he now? Why couldn't I meet him one last time? I began to feel like I was being shut out of his life. My parents' silence was like an invisible wall separating me from him. And then, I believed their lies, telling myself that maybe he really didn't want me around. Maybe he had forgotten me, forgotten the only grandchild who had been close to him. It wasn't until I received an invitation to attend his will reading that everything came to light. That's when I found out he had passed away. My heart shattered. I didn't get to say goodbye, didn't get to hug him one last time. The beautiful memories I kept in my heart were now only filled with immense pain and regret. I couldn't even say a final goodbye to him. I remember every moment when I was a child, fascinated by science. Those afternoons when the sunlight gently filtered through the garage window, my grandfather and I worked on experiments together. He always told me that Little Scientist was me, and I believed him because he was the only one who understood me in this family. He didn't just teach me about experiments. He opened my intellectual world with stories about great scientists and the brilliant theories he immersed himself in. That small research room in the garage was our private world, where I could explore and dream freely, without anyone stopping me. Every time I completed a successful experiment, he looked at me with pride in his eyes. He said I was the only one in this family who understood the value of intellect and research. I was the only one who didn't see science as just dry numbers or something distant. That was the passion he had nurtured in me since I was little, and I never thought that passion would be interrupted by things I couldn't have anticipated. However, while my grandfather and I bonded through science, my parents never understood me. They always regarded my passions as unimportant, and they always saw Vanessa, my sister, as the most accomplished in their eyes. Vanessa seemed glamorous, always knowing how to make our parents proud, but I realized she was just good at being fake, having no passion or ideals of her own. She always found ways to grab their attention, making them forget about me. They never listened to me talk about the interesting discoveries I made in my experiments. And when I spoke about scientific theories, my parents just sneered and told me I was daydreaming or wasting time, while Vanessa received praise every time she talked about shopping trips or glamorous parties. Gradually, my parents started behaving strangely. They no longer encouraged me to join conversations. They always seemed uninterested in my hobbies and even began cutting off communication between me and him. When I called to ask about him, they would just say he was in a nursing home and didn't want to see anyone anymore. But I never believed those words. I couldn't believe he didn't want to see me, the only grandchild he always called his little scientist. But my parents never bothered to explain the situation clearly. Every time I asked about him, the only answer I got was, "He's in the nursing home. Don't worry about it anymore." That was the only response I received for months. Still, I kept in contact with him through letters. I wrote to him about the experiments I was doing, about the new ideas I had discovered. Each letter was a bridge connecting me to him, a part of the world my parents had tried to separate me from. I eagerly awaited his replies, hoping he would tell me that he still remembered me, that he still loved me as he always had. But one day, those letters abruptly stopped coming. For the first time in my life, I felt a vague fear. I called my parents, asking about his condition, but I only received vague answers, and that feeling in me grew stronger as something was wrong. Yet my parents continued to insist that I shouldn't worry, that he was in the nursing home and didn't need to be visited. Those words, repeated over and over, made me slowly lose hope, and the silence grew louder within me. Then one day, I decided to return to visit him, but when I arrived, the people at the nursing home told me that he had passed away. The feeling I had at that moment was indescribable, of both painful and angry. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe he had left me without saying goodbye. I couldn't believe my parents had separated me from him all these years, and now I had no chance to say a final farewell. The memories of him, the moments we spent together in the research room, now remain only in my mind as a deep, irremovable pain. When I walked into the room, the cold and heavy air filled the space. The whole family was there, sitting around a large table, their eyes glowing with anticipation, and I could feel the tension in every movement of theirs. Vanessa, in her expensive dress and shining necklace, sat close to my parents, her face full of self-satisfaction and expectation. Every time I looked at her, I couldn't help but feel the fakeness in every gesture, every word. But at this moment, what she was waiting for wasn't the truth, but the large share of the inheritance he would leave behind. My parents sat silently, but I could see the worry mixed with hope in their eyes. They were too used to controlling everything in the family, and now, everything was focused on his assets. It seemed they had already prepared a plan to take everything, turning him into a tool to serve their ambitions. They never thought about the emotions, the memories between me and him. They didn't care about me. All they wanted was money, and I knew that. The lawyer stood up, his gaze cold, his voice stern. Everyone in the room fell silent, as if waiting for something momentous to happen. Each person had their own hopes in their hearts, but no one could anticipate what would happen next. The lawyer began reading the will. The entire research lab, copyright of the documents, and 50% of personal assets will be transferred to Hanna Williams. The entire room froze for a few seconds. No one said a word. The lawyer's words echoed in the air, and I stood frozen, my eyes wide open, unable to believe what I had just heard. How could this be? Why me? All these years, I had done nothing beneficial for him. I was just a distant grandchild in the eyes of the family. And yet, he left me the most important part of his assets. The research lab where he had invested so much effort, where I had worked with him on each experiment, each idea. The copyright to the documents, the works, the research he had dedicated his entire life to creating, now belonged to me. As for his personal assets, things I never imagined, they were now in my hands. Everything was not as I had imagined. I could only stand still, feeling like everything around me was spinning, and I couldn't grasp it. As I stood there, still in shock, unable to believe the truth, I heard his voice from the will, his voice, the one I had missed, the one I longed to hear for so many years. She is the only one who came to me for intellect, not for money. His words struck like a lightning bolt, ripping apart the tension in the air, making my heart tighten. His voice was warm, full of love, and I could clearly feel that he had always trusted me, that he cherished me not for what I had, but for who I was. I was the only one he trusted to preserve his legacy, not because of money, but because of intellectual passion, something we both valued. My entire family was silent. No one said anything. Vanessa sat there, stunned, as if she had just been splashed with a bucket of cold water. Her face turned pale, unable to believe what was happening. My parents, the ones I had once thought would stand firm in any situation, now had no idea what to do but remained silent, their heads lowered. The stunned silence spread throughout the room. I had never seen my family so quiet, as if they had all been stripped of their power, robbed of what they had planned for. And then, while everyone was still in shock, the lawyer continued to play recordings and emails he had left for me, proving the truth I hadn't known. The emails from him, the recordings he had sent me in the last months of his life, came through clearly. I saw the messages he had sent, talking about his loneliness, about being prevented from meeting me. The letters I had sent, the calls I had made, all were blocked, interrupted by my parents. They had lied to me. They had prevented all contact between me and him. Then came even more shocking revelations, Vanessa. The following recordings made me shudder. I heard his voice in a final recording where he talked about being pressured to sign a power of attorney. Vanessa, when he was weak and ill, had come and forced him to sign, making him hand over control of his assets to her. Those words cut through my mind like a knife. Vanessa had taken advantage of him, had forced him when he no longer had the strength to resist. She had manipulated him just as she had always manipulated everyone in this family. My whole family remained silent. My parents kept their heads down, not daring to look at me. Vanessa, she couldn't say anything. All the fakeness, all the schemes she had built were now exposed. I stood there, feeling empty inside, not because I had gained the assets, but because I realized that he, the one I loved, the one I respected, had endured lies and selfishness throughout his last years. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't just stand here and let things end this way. His legacy wasn't just about material possessions. It was a spiritual value I would carry with me for life. And I wouldn't let this family continue to exploit him, to exploit his trust. Then, my grandmother, who had always been silent and patient, suddenly stood up. The entire room fell still. All eyes, from my parents to Vanessa, turned to her. No one dared to breathe loudly. My grandmother, who had always been the embodiment of calmness, now stood tall, her hands clenched so tightly that I could hear her knuckles crack. Her gaze was firm and sharp, as if, for the first time in all these years, she was no longer someone who accepted easy relationships, but a strong, determined woman. She walked to the center of the room, never looking back, as if she had made a monumental decision, one that could not be changed. "I have been silent for too long," she began, her voice hoarse with anger, but filled with certainty. Each word she spoke seemed to be poured into the ears of everyone in the room. "From today, those who have betrayed will no longer be my family." A thick silence filled the room. Her words struck like a lightning bolt in the faces of those still present. My parents, who had always considered themselves the decision makers in the family, now just lowered their heads. Vanessa, who always prided herself on her glamorous appearance, could no longer maintain her usual self-confidence. Her face turned pale, her fingers awkwardly clutching each other. My entire family, from my parents to Vanessa, didn't dare speak a word. The truth had been exposed, and they knew they could no longer take control of what they once thought was theirs. Grandmother continued, but her words were not just a statement. They were a declaration of the value of love and justice. Legacy is for love, not greed. Each of her words was like a sharp knife, exposing the greed and deceit of my parents and Vanessa. Those who had exploited his love, who had turned him into a tool to satisfy their personal ambitions, could no longer hide behind the mask of false morality. At that moment, my grandmother was no longer the gentle woman I had known for all these years. She had become the one who stood up to defend justice, to protect the love and memory of him. She didn't just stand up to condemn the greed of my parents. She also did something I never thought she would. She turned around and pointed at my parents, her voice full of anger. "You exploited him, exploited the love he had for his daughter and grandson. But today, you will have no place in this house anymore. Leave now." Her words were like a knife cutting into my heart, but I also felt a strange sense of relief. My grandmother, the one I thought was weak, was the strongest person in this family. She didn't hesitate to stand up for justice, to protect his legacy, not because of money, but because of the love and respect he had for me. My parents, although the heads of the family, now only knew how to lower their heads, not daring to resist, not daring to say anything. Even Vanessa, no matter how confident she seemed, was now silent, unable to respond. They had been stripped of their power and everything they thought was theirs. No one dared stand up, no one could confront my grandmother. My entire family, from my parents to Vanessa, was kicked out without a word of resistance, without any objections. At that moment, the room became empty, no more rushing, no more loud words or calculating glances. Everything felt like a battle had ended, and I felt part of the pain in my heart disappear. I no longer felt the need to prove anything, because my grandmother had done that. She had stood up and protected him, protected the spiritual legacy he left behind. And I also realized that I no longer needed anything from this family. They had deceived me, and I wouldn't let that affect my life anymore. After everyone left the room, my grandmother looked at me with a gentle gaze, as if telling me that everything was fine. I turned back to look at her, my heart filled with gratitude. She wasn't just the protector of my family, but the one who taught me a valuable lesson about resilience and strength. She didn't need to say much. Just standing up and acting was enough for me to understand. And I decided, no lawsuits, no revenge. I didn't need their approval because I knew I had everything I needed. I would not let the wounds of the past affect my future. His legacy would not be tainted by greed and deceit. I would make it a reality, not just for him, but for myself. With the inheritance money, I decided to establish a science center in his name, a place to help poor students passionate about research, just like what he had done for me. This center would be a place for people like me, those with passion and intellect, to grow and fulfill their dreams. It would be a place to preserve the values he had given me, to continue his work, and to follow in his footsteps, protecting his legacy throughout my life. I no longer need recognition from my family. I have found my own path, and I will never lose my way again. Today, I am not just a respected researcher, but also the protector of his memory and legacy. I no longer expect recognition from my family, because I have realized that true value doesn't need anyone to define it. What I've done, what I've given, is the clearest proof of what I truly deserve. I don't need to seek approval or praise from those who have never really understood me. His legacy is not about wealth or power, but about passion and intellect, about respect for the values he passed on. And my family, now, is nothing but a shadow of the past. I no longer feel the need to return or fix a relationship that has been shattered. They've created their own isolation. My old family is now facing a crisis. Vanessa, whom I once thought of as the perfect sister, the one who always received special treatment, now can't maintain the career she built on deception. The relationships around her are falling apart. Constant criticism echoes from the public, and she has no one left by her side. The image she once portrayed, perfectly painted, is now shattered. The relationships she built on lies and greed are crumbling fast. The work she once prided herself on, the major contracts she thought would bring her to the top, now only leave a trail of failures. She is no longer trusted by anyone, and all she receives is loneliness. My parents aren't faring any better. Though they once tried to maintain the image of a perfect family, everything has now been exposed. They face heavy criticism from the public and are isolated in their own cruelty. The friends, the so-called allies, they once relied on have now turned away. Their selfishness, greed, and deceitful actions have cost them everything. While they face criticism and isolation, I feel a sense of relief. I no longer feel resentment or anger. It's simply that the truth has been revealed, and now they must live with their choices. As for me, I have found my path. The science center I established is not just a place for research development, but a symbol of my belief in myself and the values he passed on to me. It is not just where I continue his work, but a place to help poor students, people like me, and those who are passionate about science but lack the means. I made the right decision. I don't need recognition from anyone, and I no longer need my family to feel complete. My values are not bound by anyone. They are mine, and I will protect them until the end. Grandmother was right. Legacy is not something you can measure with money or assets. A true legacy is what you leave in the hearts of others. It's love and intellect, things that others can continue and turn into reality. And now, I am the one to carry on, continuing the dreams and ideals he left behind. Have you ever been separated from a loved one by your family? If you were Hannah, would you forgive or cut ties as she did? Like, comment, subscribe to continue following touching stories about integrity, spiritual legacy, and family justice.